So, White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. One of his earlier works. It's a short story that I think was released in the late 1850s, 1848. So, yeah, that was around not too long after, like, Poor Folk and, like, The Double, which I'd like to review next some of these days. But, yeah, White Nights concerns it is probably one of my favorite ones, but it's, like, so hard to kind of return to it because it's, like, so I just kind of break into tears anytime I try to read anything, especially like that or like The Idiot. Sorry, excuse the cat right here, off screen, making a ton of noise, or maybe on screen. Yeah, there's okay, there. Starring role. Okay. So White Nights is about a young man who's actually unnamed. He's anonymous. He doesn't. It's not. It's from his point of view. Yes. So you get a bit of a Notes from Underground kind of vibe from him, only in the sense that he's alone and despairing, and he's like he walks the streets of St. Petersburg, classic Dostoevsky kind of setting, at night mostly because he doesn't have to face the people that he kind of knows and doesn't have to be reminded by it, and then he can kind of see other people kind of as a uh, stolid kind of unreactive observer almost like he can look at these other people and like not have to really interact or do anything, but he can kind of see and slide through these the night kind of stricken streets with an air of but sometimes he can take on their moods too, or oftentimes he does this, and he feels like if they are feeling like dejected and unhappy, he feels that way. But if they're feeling blissful and upbeat, then he takes on that emotion too. So yeah, he's kind of a way. It seems to be kind of a wayward observer, but at the same time, um, he's the only person he can really keep company with him is his maid, Matriova, I believe her name, and Matriona, and she is an old and kind of like unsociable and not really um, um, and just kind of like kind of stuck in her ways. But I guess you could blame her for the maid of the house. She's kind of expected to do the same duties and carrying those out every day. But then he finally he encounters this one girl by the name of Nestenka, which is it's kind of a variation on the name Anastasia too. And kind of forwards a little bit to like maybe Nastasia Filipova, and he is right off the bat stricken with her. Like he is like she's the he finds her crying by these railroads, and he's like walks off, and like very contrary to his initial kind of or to his his inclinations, he approaches her and is asks her why is she why is she grieving, and then she's like, well, my lover, he swore he's supposed to return to St. Petersburg today, but he never showed up, and she's waiting by the rail station, I believe, for him, and he ends up comforting her and then consoling her, and then she is pretty much thankful for it, and then he's like, yeah, he just also kind of bears more about himself, and then she's like, I'm alone, I'm not like really I'm not really, there's not much to know about me. I just, I wander the streets, and I'm just, and then she's like, that's fine. She's fine with it. Like, which is rare because it's like, it's not many people, especially ladies, would actually want to stop and, talk to this man who's almost like kind of there's nothing too much going on in his life. There's not much, he's just kind of a loner who's like stays in his apartment most of the time. And it's like, so right up, that's why one of the reasons he's like smitten with her is because of that kind of how agreeable and like fine she is with him, and then they also bond over certain things like literature too, but she also kind of scolds him too, like she says like, hey, you're living your life as if it's a book, and I think she says at one point. So this takes place over the course of 4 nights, and the second night, they divulge more information about one another, and and then he tells her that he's like a kind of daydreamer, and a lot of his stuff, like a lot of his fantasies are, you feel bad because they're so like vivid, and they're so intricate, but at the same time they're kind of, he lives in those fantasies and he never takes action in his life to kind of bring these to fruition. So you have a lot of doubt and insecurity and like about his abilities, and he's just kind of like again kind of just drifting around Petersburg, like not really putting these into action in a way like he could very well at some point. I think Dostoevsky kind of makes this clear, but it's an interesting kind of not a contradiction, but like a definite kind of thing, because I think part of this is like Dostoevsky is part maybe a little bit of or maybe a great deal of himself is in this narrator, because Dostoevsky too of himself was a dreamer and was able to kind of show the power of imagination and to show like what that would look like in writing form, and um, and he kind of swore by that. Like he lived such a dreamer's kind of a starving artist life that he was in debt most of his life. Like he kind of procured a gambling addiction early on that kind of had waned out by his second wife, Anna, kind of forced him to kind of curb that lifestyle. And then he was like very very much like like in debt and kind of always kind of stuck in like kind of in the manacles of that kind of debtor's lifestyle, which is probably maybe an indication of that maybe Russian society wasn't really the best, like the kind of system that was set up, the economy was set up that in such that like it was aristocracies, and that the wealth didn't really, hence why he was probably a fan of like the Petrovsky Circle and that whole socialism, the kind of allure and seduction of socialism when he was in his late 20s, and that's what led him to be up to a mock execution. So I guess this is I want to say this is, he might have made this story like right after, actually, because it wasn't 1847 that he was that execution with the czarist orders to have that. Because I think if that's the case, then this might almost be kind of a biting thing of like maybe the ideals, the high-minded ideals of like romanticism, and that were very much in the air at the time, and definitely in the 19th century, like all throughout it, and continue the residues like still today, like romanticism. We love that, I love it, that as a style, as an art movement, was very pioneered a lot, like subjective lens over kind of objective critical analysis. And a lot of Dostoevsky is that, but at the same time he's also saying like, listen, like there's a point where you have to kind of put up, you have to like kind of put your foot down and say like, okay, that's enough dreaming for now, like that's enough, because it's at some points it kind of gets so heady and it gets so out of hand that you become almost like this kind of cyclical, like a machine. It turns into a kind of, you end up a bit like Oblomov from like Don Cherow's great novel, Oblomov, and it's you end up turning into this. You're so fat, you're so fixated to this kind of lifestyle. You're like, I'm not gonna let anybody else step on me ever. Nobody ever touches this lifestyle. Nobody's gonna ever take it. Like I'm gonna have total freedom to do what I want to do, which is to dream and to sleep and to do this. And that ends up like he suffers love. He suffers like all these different things. And as likewise, the narrator of this gives himself totally to Nastenka, thinking she's just gonna all of a sudden turn around and be like, listen, like the reality is that Nastenka, yes, she's like beautiful. Yes, the absolute. Yes, she has all this grace and elegance. She's into Pushkin and she's into opera and she's into this, the art scene and all that. But at the same time, she did say she was in love, her lover, just because she wasn't, her heart belonged to somebody else. And he acknowledges that. He's like, okay, yep. And yet he still keeps, fantasizing and bringing up all these scenarios like, what if? And that reminds me of myself when I was a young man, maybe early 20s or so, when I was like, I really had a crush on this girl, and I was thinking like all these like these things of like imagining like what life would be and like with her, like all these different I like wed myself to these scenarios that were, even though I had only met her a few times, at least at the time, and like I didn't, and then later on it was like, she basically like rejected me, like nicely or whatever, but it was it reminded me so much. And I remember reading this story, I think almost around that time, and I was like, dang, maybe this is what's going on. She's like, she has somebody else, she's interested in somebody else. The fact is she isn't interested in me, and that's kind of, I have to just let that go and let that, completely just like that fantasy just die and just go away. And pretty much it is. Like I don't really think about it anymore. If I like to think I've moved on, like I don't think about certain things I've like idolized or fantasies and stuff that I've kept alive and nursed over these years. I'd like to think um that, but then I still am kind of guilty of that. Like, ooh, like what if this happens? Like, what if I move across to this side of the country or this part of the world and fall in love with somebody there? And it's like this kind of thing. That love is like a double edged sword, because you're like, it is something that it's either with romanticism, some of it like it's like stars a young Werther. It is the death knell of certain people. It is like, yeah, we are going to kill ourselves over this. And luckily, spoiler alert, that's not what happens with the narrator. But what happens on the fourth night is that Nistaka continues to, is like freaking out of the fact that her lover hasn't called, that, wrote her. Obviously, they didn't have cell phones at the point, but and she's very, concerned. And then the narrator ends up like comforting her again, and then basically like uh and then basically she ends up seeing her lover walking through the night of St. Petersburg, and then right in the middle of like her like just like confessing and like and hugging, embracing the narrator, um she's like, I'm sorry, I have to go. And then she breaks into the night, and then kisses him briefly, and then just like um and just like wanders off, and with her lover. And it's like that's and then by morning she actually writes a letter to kind of apologize for her behavior, and she's like, yeah, sorry about that. That she really did like appreciate the narrator's the amount of like care that he gave her. But in a way it's like it's and then he there's a really beautiful part where he's like, one of the quotes is like, when the narrator, one of the last pages or two, but that I should feel any resentment against you, Nastenka, that I should cast a dark shadow over you, your bright, serene happiness, that I should crush a single one of those delicate blossoms or blooms which you wear in your dark hair while you walk up to the aisle with him. Oh no, never, never. May your sky be always clear. May your dear smiles always be bright and happy. And may you be forever blessed for that moment of bliss and happiness which you gave one another on a lonely and grateful heart. Good Lord, only for a moment of bliss, such moment of sufficient for a whole man's life. So you get that kind of a theme again of Dostoevsky's own suffering, like his attitude towards it, like that idea of having a tiny little fractious moment, or not like a tiny infinitesimal microcosmal moment of like bliss and happiness is like enough to kind of just like pervade and be good enough like to think about the rest of the way. And I felt that way a lot too, like about certain things. Like I've certainly remembered the times when I traveled to a city or a country that I really really loved. That may have been only a few days, even, or maybe a few weeks at most or whatever. And like I remember that way more distinctly, vividly than any kind of boring memory I've had about working jobs that I hate. So there's a lot of that in Dostoevsky's life about like epilepsy. Like he would have like a tiny little moment with between that anticipating that horrific kind of almost near death experience. Really, like he felt like him just being like that total nervous attack, fit that would of desperation that would come in and seize him, and he'd have that tiny little moment that he would owe everything to. And I just find that like to be the definitely most beautiful kind of ways of viewing suffering, because suffering, there's like he talks so much about it, and like so much of this is like people could kind of bring it down and break it down and be like, okay, well, the narrator of White Nights is kind of a white knight. He just like endlessly chases after her, and like you could put it in terms like really brutal kind of brash terms, like he was like a cuck, or he was just there, like the white men beta male, like they basically like they just kind of like orbit around girls that they find super attractive or are, and then they're just kind of like there to kind of be like, hey, I'm there for you, and then I'm gonna like support you and supply for you and kind of be the surrogate male, but at the same time there's going to be this other like guy way more fit for her that she already loves and isn't, like way more attractive and successful, and she's going to come back and, and but she's never going to ever give herself truly to you. So there's that whole thing of like kind of cartoonizing it, like making it absurd, and like just like there's like some bits and threads of truth in that, like about being realistic, I suppose, like but I think like the most part it's just like a cautionary tale. Like, don't um invest so much into this idea that this person is the one, like the ultimate one and only. I think that, I think, romanticism kind of over glamorized and over kind of hyped that ideal of like you have to be true to one person only. It's like your one love. It's like, the love of like that's like held, like the, and then a lot of times you get kind of weird, not weird, but like kind of certain things that turn suicidal, like you get or murder suicides, like Heinrich von Kleist, I think, and his lover Henriette something, and they both, took it so seriously, like this idea, like um of like of that cataclysmic kind of love that like did not um like compromise on anything on behalf, that, they took to the point where I think they killed each other, like they both shot each other at the same time, I think, um or maybe one of them drowned, I'm not sure. But yeah, this is a, Dostoevsky has another great short story that has a similar thing. I'm not sure if it was humiliated and abused. I think I did go through all of his like lesser known kind of things, and I tried, and I've still yet to have actually exhausted all of his stuff. Believe it or not, like I think I've, as much as I've been reading him since, for at least like 7, going on almost 8 years, and it's like I haven't yet to have actually exhausted all of his stuff. Output of, short stories and like novellas, and I think I did all of his novels though. But there's one of them, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was the landlady, but it was one of those uh like it was another kind of case of like a young man, and wanting him, like in love with this girl that he knew since he was a child, and they both kind of had a complicated love, and they both and then she ends up basically falling in love with another person. It's like kind of like that complicated kind of love, and it's like, like what does the dreamer do in this situation? Should they, and I think like, go back to the narrator at the end of the story, like he sees his housemaid, or his uh again Matriona, and like he is just like tearful again, because he sees like an image, spinning image of like what he might be when he's that age, like old and alone. And it is like a very um yeah, it's just like the way he, describes things like St. Petersburg at night, just like the whole um like spectacle of just like people walking him by, and like that, observer, not observer effect psychologically, but just kind of like almost like a closed system, I guess. Like he's just like, and like everybody else is walking by him, like kind of, you know, with lovers and all that. And it's like, it is a bit of a cliche, this idea of like, like a love, like, to have a, one and only kind of unrequited love is like, through the ages, like you have this, at least as far back as not, not just Shakespeare, stupid me, but, ancient Greece, like, Sumer, I guess, like the old kind of tablets of Enuma Elish, I suppose, like probably that talks about love and about, like the bar, the old, was it barmaid, I think, I can't remember her name, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, um, that, gives him like a really, that gives Gilgamesh kind of a brutal kind of truth, but yeah, it perseveres throughout history, this idea, and that's not to say that's any less right or wrong, it's just, I think I'm taking Dostoevsky's side of, it is really, it's so like otherworldly when you do feel that, but like not to remember that all these things amount to fantasy, and they're just in your head, and to kind of step away and to see things dispassionately and clearly, and to remember that, hey, she could just as easily be not the person that you think she is, and to just choose somebody else on a whim. Or this isn't a testament to girls, or maybe, like, women are more prone to do this, but like, it's just, don't, just always, try to keep yourself like one foot at least rooted in reality, in the real world. So yeah, I think that's all I have for White Nights by Dostoevsky. It's a definite recommend, as always. Anything by Dostoevsky. Yeah, I think that's all. Thanks for watching.